When you think of a weapon, you probably picture something you can, like, actually drop on your foot.
Right, yeah, something physical.
Exactly. A physical object holding kinetic energy. Steel, chemicals, gunpowder.
Sure.
And if it's dangerous, well, you just lock it in a vault. You set up a perimeter. It's a very binary reality, right? The weapon is either safely in the vault or it's out in the world doing damage.
Yeah, but suddenly that tangible vault is just utterly useless.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome, to this custom-tailored deep dive. We are tearing apart a massive stack of research today to find out exactly how the European Union is trying to police this entirely invisible battleground.
Because the weapon is no longer a stick of dynamite.
Right, it's an algorithm.
Right. We were moving from, a 19th century anarchist hurling explosives in a crowded town square to a modern digital extremist using a highly optimized social media feed to recruit teenagers right out of their bedrooms.
It is a complete paradigm shift in global security. It just changes everything. It does. And to understand how Europe is scrambling to adapt its legal and technological shields, we are pulling from some pretty heavy sources today.
Yeah, we've got a really robust stack. We're looking at the foundational academic typologies of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically, we're talking about David Rappaport's wave theory and Fernando Reinares and Eduardo González Calea's historical stages.
But we aren't just staying in the academic theory, right?
No, not at all. We're also analyzing the actual institutional policy documents and the hard EU legal frameworks, things like Directive 277/551, to see how that theory actually translates into real-world policing.
So we're going to unpack how this hyper-digital threat actually impacts your daily life. Your travel across European borders and your digital privacy.
Well, which is huge.
It's massive. But before we get into the automated machine learning algorithms and the hash databases and the bureaucratic nightmare of modern EU law.
Which is a lot to get through.
It's a lot. But we need a baseline first. We have to understand what terrorism actually is and how it evolved, because the word itself has completely flipped its meaning over the centuries.
It really has. If we trace the semantic origin of the word terror in a political context, it doesn't start with, a rebel hiding in a cave.
Right.
It starts as a highly organized tool of the state.
Wait, really? The state?
Yeah. You have to go all the way back to the French Revolution, specifically the 1790s, during the Reign of Terror led by Maximilien Robespierre.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In 1793, the Jacobins essentially declared terror as the official order of the day.
Meaning the guillotine wasn't like a symbol of rebellion. It was the government's primary administrative tool.
Exactly. It was a state-sponsored legal mechanism used to repress opponents and enforce absolute obedience. Robespierre famously justified it in a speech by claiming that in times of revolution, terror is nothing but prompt, severe, inflexible justice.
That is wild.
Yeah, you even had newspapers at the time, like the Courrier de l'Égalité, openly praising the terror caused by the guillotine, because they saw it as a necessary means to consolidate the republic.
So the state wielded terror against the people to maintain control.
Precisely.
Which is, a complete 180 from how we use the term today. If you ask literally anyone on the street right now, terrorism is exclusively defined as non-state actors. Insurgents, extremists, rogue groups attacking the state or its civilians.
Right.
So how do we get from the state dropping the guillotine to, an individual planting a bomb?
Well, the catalyst for that shift was entirely technological, and it arrived in the second half of the 19th century.
Okay, what happened?
Two specific innovations completely changed the landscape. First, you have the invention of dynamite by Alfred Nobel in the 1860s, and second, the mass deployment of the rotary printing press.
So dynamite makes the explosion portable.
Exactly.
And the printing press ensures that everyone reads about it the very next morning.
You nailed it. And that combination democratized violence. Before dynamite, inflicting massive structural damage required, a state military. You needed cannons and an army.
Right, you couldn't just blow up a building by yourself.
Exactly. But suddenly, a single radical with a stick of dynamite could wield the destructive power of a military unit. And because cheap, mass-produced newspapers were suddenly available in every major city, a single act of targeted violence could instantly capture the attention of millions.
This is just terrifying to think about.
It birthed this operational concept of propaganda by the deed.
Right.
Radical theorists of the time, like Johannes Most, realized the violence itself was the message.
Like the physical damage wasn't even the main point.
Right. Taking out a political figure was secondary. Capturing mass media attention to broadcast a grievance, that was the primary goal.
There is a quote in the sources from 1878 that just hits you like a truck regarding this mindset shift.
Oh, the Vera Zakhala quote.
Yes. So she was a Russian revolutionary, and she shoots the governor of St. Petersburg. And she stands up in court during her trial and flatly declares, "I am a terrorist, not a murderer."
Yeah, it gives you chills.
She is actively claiming a political, almost moral high ground there.
She was completely separating her violence from common criminality, right? She was framing it as a systemic political intervention. And that moment really kicks off the first of 5 distinct historical stages of terrorism that are identified in our sources.
Right, by scholar Eduardo González Calleja. Or actually, Fernando Reynarez also touches on these stages.
Yes, both of them map this out. And these stages are vital to understand because they explain exactly why the EU's current strategies look the way they do today.
Let's break down those 5 stages then, because if we don't understand the evolution of the tactics, the EU's current panic over digital extremism makes absolutely no sense.
So stage 1 is exactly what we just described, the 1880s wave of Russian nihilists and European anarchists. Their primary tactic was the targeted assassination.
The bomb thrown at the royal carriage, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Or shooting a specific politician. They wanted to decapitate the leadership structure. Then stage 2 shifts dramatically. It spans from roughly 1914 to 1945.
So the world wars.
Yeah. This is the era of totalitarian states and massive wartime terror, where violence was absorbed into massive global conflicts, fascism, and state suppression.
World War I and II just completely swallow the narrative of violence.
They really do. But after 1945, the empires start crumbling, which brings us to the third stage, anti-colonial struggles.
Okay, so like the 1950s and 60s.
Right. Throughout those decades, groups in places like Algeria, Kenya, and across the Middle East used asymmetric guerrilla warfare specifically to drive European colonial powers out of their territories.
They were fighting literal wars of national liberation.
Yes. And then we hit the fourth stage in the late 1960s and 70s, which brings the violence back into the heart of Western Europe. This is the wave of the New Left and nationalist or separatist groups.
Okay, so groups like the IRA in Ireland, ETA in Spain, or the Red Army faction in Germany.
Exactly.
The sources actually classify this fourth stage as endogenous terrorism, right? Because it grew out of the domestic populations they were operating within.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yes, and their rulebook was incredibly different from what we see today. Like if you look at the IRA or ETA, they often fought for specific territorial or political concessions from their own governments.
Right.
And crucially, I mean, they often called in warnings before a bomb went off.
They did. Their primary goal was economic disruption and political leverage. Mass, indiscriminate slaughter of everyday civilians who might actually be part of the constituency they claimed to represent that would have been totally counterproductive to their political goals.
They wanted a seat at the negotiating table, not to destroy the table completely.
Precisely.
Right, so transitioning to the fifth stage is like going from a targeted sniper rifle to a blindfolded shotgun blast. Because this current stage, characterized by religious extremism and groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, it's an exogenous threat.
It is entirely transnational. Modern jihadist groups are not fighting for a localized political concession from, say, the Spanish or British government.
No, they don't care about a specific border dispute.
Exactly. They are driven by a globalized ideology seeking to overturn the entire international order. They divide humanity strictly into true believers and heretics. And because their goal is cosmic rather than local, their tactics involve mass, indiscriminate casualties.
Right. There are no warning calls anymore.
None.
And ISIS evolved this even further, didn't they? They introduced a bizarre form of hybrid warfare. They didn't just want to be a clandestine cell hiding in a basement somewhere. They violently seized physical territory across Syria and Iraq.
Yeah, they built a proto-state.
Which is crazy. They were taxing citizens and running municipal services while simultaneously broadcasting high-definition executions to the world. It was global armed theater.
It really was.
But it makes me wonder, did the core motivation of terrorism actually change? Or did the internet just give ISIS the ultimate rotary printing press for that 19th century idea of propaganda by the deed?
That is a great question. And honestly, the mechanism of using violence to generate fear to enact political change remains identical.
It's the same core engine.
Right. What changed is the sheer scale of the ambition and the psychological reach. To fight a global war, ISIS needed a global army. They couldn't just recruit locally. They had to pull everyday citizens from Paris, London, and Berlin into this fifth historical stage.
Which begs the question, how does that actually work? Because if I'm an ordinary citizen, I don't just wake up one Tuesday and decide to join a transnational extremist group.
No, of course not.
How does the psychology of radicalization actually function, especially when the recruit is sitting thousands of miles away from a physical conflict zone?
Well, we have some incredibly detailed psychological frameworks in the sources to explain this. The late political scientist Ehud Sprinzak described a theory of delegitimization.
Delegitimization. Okay, unpack that.
He argued that radicalization is a progressive psychological passage. Someone might start with a highly legitimate, perfectly understandable political grievance.
Like maybe anger over foreign policy or domestic discrimination.
Exactly. But slowly, they undergo a cognitive shift where they delegitimize the entire political order. They stop seeing the government as a flawed system that needs reform and start viewing it as an absolute, irredeemable evil.
And once you classify an entire society as irredeemably evil, the moral barrier to committing violence against it just evaporates.
That's exactly what happens.
But how does a person systematically walk down that path? I know the sources highlight Fathali Moghadam's six-story building metaphor, which maps this out brilliantly.
Yeah, Moghadam's metaphor is probably one of the clearest ways to visualize this for anyone trying to understand it.
It's a great analogy.
Right, so imagine a six-story building. On the ground floor, you have a massive population of people who are simply interpreting their current socioeconomic or political circumstances as unjust. They feel marginalized, frustrated, or alienated.
Which, honestly, is a completely normal human experience. Millions of people are on the ground floor at any given time.
Exactly. Being angry at the system is totally normal. But a smaller fraction of those people decide to walk up the stairs to the first floor.
Okay, what happens there?
Here, they actively seek ways to remedy the injustice. They look for legitimate avenues for political expression or social mobility.
So they might protest or vote or try to get a better job.
Right. But if they perceive that the system has locked the doors and their legitimate avenues are blocked, they move to the second floor.
I imagine this is where things start getting really dangerous. If you're angry and you feel like nobody is listening, you start looking for a target.
You do. On the second floor, the individual begins actively blaming outgroups for their problems. The generalized frustration morphs into specific, directed anger.
Okay.
This is where virulent anti-Western sentiment, anti-Semitism, or intense sectarian hatred takes root. They have officially identified their scapegoat.
And if human nature dictates that we want validation for our anger, I'm assuming the next step is finding an echo chamber. Does the model account for how people isolate themselves once they've found that scapegoat?
It does, and that happens on the third floor. This floor is defined by a dual process. First, moral disengagement from mainstream society, and second, moral engagement with an extremist group.
So they swap out their community.
Precisely. The individual starts adopting a radical ideology that rationalizes violence as a legitimate tool. They start cutting ties with moderate friends or family members.
Just completely isolating themselves. Then they move up to the fourth floor.
Yeah. On the fourth floor, the individual is fully consolidated into the extremist organization structure. The us versus them mentality is absolute at this point. Their entire identity is now defined by the group's cause.
And the final floor?
The fifth floor is the operational stage. The organization provides the specific psychological and physical mechanisms to bypass the natural human reluctance to kill.
Wow.
The individual is trained, equipped, and psychologically hardened to carry out the attack. They step off the fifth floor and, well, pull the trigger.
It's a chillingly logical staircase, and it really mirrors another framework in our materials, Macaulay and Moskalenko's pyramid.
Yes, the pyramid model.
Okay, illustrate this massive base of sympathizers that slowly narrows down to a tiny, sharp tip of violent actors. And they emphasize that as you move up the pyramid, groupthink completely takes over.
Right, you get sucked in.
You enter a closed information loop where moderate voices are filtered out and the most extreme interpretations of reality are just constantly validated by your peers.
And this isolation is exactly what modern extremist recruiters weaponize. Mark Sageman's research on the three waves of global Islamism reveals a really fascinating demographic shift in who is actually climbing these stairs.
Let's talk about those waves.
So the first wave, were the veterans of the 1980s Afghan war against the Soviets. They were physically hardened combatants.
Real soldiers, essentially.
Right. Then the second wave in the 1990s was driven by diaspora populations reacting to localized conflicts, like the brutal wars in Bosnia or Chechnya.
So they had tangible physical connections to geopolitical traumas.
Yes. But the third wave, the one Europe is dealing with today, is completely different.
How so?
The third wave consists largely of European and Middle Eastern youth who have absolutely no direct link to those previous physical wars.
Wait, really? No connection at all?
None. They are not veterans. They haven't suffered in a combat zone. Their radicalization happens almost entirely online, completely disconnected from the physical realities of the conflict zones they claim to represent.
And here's where the research just shatters a massive public stereotype. Because the conventional wisdom is that a terrorist recruit must be, an impoverished, uneducated loner who has fallen through the cracks of society and has nothing left to lose.
Right, the lone wolf trope.
Exactly. But Scott Atran's research completely debunks that. He found that recruits for modern suicide missions are very often middle class, well-educated, and deeply integrated into their local communities.
It's so counterintuitive, isn't it?
It really is. They have jobs, they play on local soccer teams, they have tight-knit families. Atran suggests we are looking at the banality of evil. It's a deliberate manipulation of social dynamics by extremist organizations.
Yeah, they prey on normal social bonds.
Yeah. But hold on, let's unpack this. If Atran is right, and these recruits are well-integrated middle-class kids playing weekend sports, how are they climbing all the way up to Moghadam's 5th floor without their parents, teachers, or friends noticing?
That's the terrifying part.
Like, how are they isolating themselves while sitting at the family dinner table?
Because the staircase is entirely digital now. The architecture of extremism migrated from physical training camps in the mountains of Afghanistan to the digital ecosystem living inside a smartphone.
Wow.
The isolation Macaulay and Moskalenko talked about. It doesn't require moving to a compound anymore. It just requires a pair of noise-canceling headphones and an encrypted chat app. This brings us to what the sources term the cyber jihad.
So, if the radicalization staircase is in our pockets, how did ISIS engineer it? Because they didn't just use the internet, they completely weaponized the underlying algorithms of social media.
They did.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at older groups like Al-Qaeda in the late 90s, their digital footprint was very passive.
Like Web 1.0 stuff.
Exactly. They hosted static websites or uploaded hour-long, grainy sermons by Osama bin Laden to obscure forums. It was a one-way broadcast model.
You had to actively go looking for it.
Right. But ISIS looked at the internet and saw a dynamic, interactive weapon. They adopted high-quality production values, mirroring Hollywood action films and popular video games.
It looked sleek.
Very sleek. They mastered real-time broadcasting, deployed automated Twitter swarms to game-trending algorithms, and utilized encrypted messaging for peer-to-peer grooming.
So they weren't just shouting into the void, they were actively hunting.
Absolutely hunting.
They were looking for teenagers on the ground floor of Moghadam's building who were expressing, normal teenage angst or political frustration online. And an ISIS recruiter could just slide into their direct messages, validate their anger, point them toward a scapegoat, and personally guide them up the staircase.
Step by step.
Step by step, completely under the radar of their physical community.
And the sheer speed and volume of this digital radicalization absolutely terrified European intelligence agencies.
I bet.
It became starkly apparent that traditional policing was failing. You cannot arrest your way out of an ideological virus spreading through millions of social media feeds. The EU realized they had to cut the propaganda off at the source.
But to do that, they needed the tech platforms to cooperate.
Exactly.
I can only imagine the culture clash there. You have high-level, slow-moving European bureaucrats trying to sit down with Silicon Valley tech executives who operate on the ethos of move fast and break things. How did the EU force them to the table?
That happened in December 2015 with the launch of the EU Internet Forum.
Okay, the EU Internet Forum.
Yeah, spearheaded by Commissioner Dimitris Avramopoulos. The mandate was uncompromising. The tech industry could no longer hide behind the defense that they were merely neutral conduits of information.
We're just a platform, not a publisher defense.
Exactly. The EU basically said, no, your platforms are functioning as the primary engines of global radicalization. So the forum forced governments and companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Microsoft into a unified initiative.
What were the goals?
Two main goals: massively reduce the accessibility of terrorist content online and empower civil society to flood the zone with counter-narratives.
which resulted in the deployment of automated machine learning and arguably their biggest technical achievement in December 2016, right? The database of hashes.
Yes, the hashes database.
I want to break this down because the mechanics of how this works are fascinating.
It is a masterclass in digital forensics. The database relies on cryptographic hashing.
Right. So if I'm summarizing this for a student, I'd say think of a hash database exactly like a digital immune system for the internet.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so when you upload a video, the computer doesn't see images. It sees millions of pixels and audio waves. A hashing algorithm runs all that raw data through a mathematical formula and spits out a unique string of letters and numbers, a digital fingerprint.
And if you change even one pixel of that video, the entire fingerprint changes. Precisely. So when a tech company identifies a piece of propaganda, say, an ISIS execution video, they calculate its hash. They then inject that specific mathematical signature into the shared database of hashes.
So that hash is the digital antibody.
Yes.
If Facebook deletes the video and logs the hash, and an hour later a sympathizer tries to upload the exact same raw video file to Twitter or YouTube, those platforms already have the antibody.
They're ready for it.
Right. Their automated systems check the file being uploaded against the database, recognize the mathematical signature of the terrorist content, and instantly block the upload before the video ever goes live. It never even reaches the public feed.
It creates an invisible, cross-platform firewall. And the scale of this operation is just staggering.
How big are we talking?
The database quickly accrued over 40,000 unique hashes of known terrorist media. Tech companies invested billions into automated machine learning models to run this system at scale. Wow. Google eventually reported that 98% of the violent extremist content removed from YouTube was flagged and deleted by automated algorithms before a single human being ever saw it or reported it.
98%, that is wild. But the EU didn't just outsource the problem to the tech bros in California, right? They built their own digital hunting teams.
They did. The European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, commonly known as Europol, established the Internet Referral Unit, or IRU, in July 2015.
The IRU.
Yeah. It actually evolved from a smaller initiative called Check the Web. The IRU operates within the European Counterterrorism Center and functions as a proactive, highly specialized digital task force.
So what exactly does a digital task force do on a daily basis? Are they just scrolling the dark web looking for bad guys?
Essentially, yes, but with immense linguistic and technical expertise. The IRU employs translators, religious ideology specialists, and cyber analysts who actively hunt for extremist content across surface platforms, encrypted channels, and the dark web.
Okay, so they find something. Then what?
When they locate a piece of propaganda, they issue a formal referral to the hosting company. They explicitly point out how the content violates the platform's own terms of service and request its immediate removal.
And are the companies actually listening to them? I mean, a referral is just a request.
The compliance rate is incredibly high. The sources document that the IRU boasts a removal rate between 90% and 91.4% for the content they flag.
That's a huge success rate.
It really is. But they do much more than just play digital whack-a-mole. They analyze the data they find to generate strategic documents for EU member states.
Like what kind of documents?
For instance, the IRU conducted a massive analysis tracking exactly how ISIS recruiters were specifically targeting young European women online, persuading them to travel to Syria to marry fighters.
Oh, wow. Okay, so identifying the propaganda and auto-deleting it with a hash algorithm is a massive technical achievement. But here's the friction point. A line of code can delete a video, but it cannot slap handcuffs on a suspect.
That is the big limitation.
Right. If a 19-year-old has already watched the video, radicalized in secret, bought a plane ticket to Turkey, and is trying to cross the border into Syria, the digital shield is useless at that point. You have to act in the physical world.
And that is exactly where the European legal framework hit a wall.
It just couldn't keep up.
No. The digital shield had to be matched by a physical, legal shield. This became an absolute crisis with the phenomenon of foreign fighters. Intelligence agencies realized that upwards of 5,000 individuals had traveled from European Union countries to the conflict zones in Syria and Iraq to join groups like ISIS.
5,000 citizens. I mean, that is a small army holding European passports.
Yes. And as the physical caliphate of ISIS began to collapse under military pressure, the terrifying reality was that these combat-hardened, ideologically entrenched individuals were going to use their passports to come home.
And the laws just weren't ready for that.
It's not at all. The traditional criminal codes in many European nations were completely unequipped for this. Historically, anti-terror laws focused on the act. You're arrested after you build the bomb or after you commit the assault.
Right.
But how do you prosecute someone who hasn't actually committed a terrorist act on European soil, but simply traveled to a war zone and trained with an insurgent group?
The laws had to catch up to the reality of the timeline.
He really did.
The EU operates on a four-pillar counterterrorism strategy, right? Prevent, protect, pursue, and respond. They realized they needed to completely overhaul the pursue pillar. Which brings us to the most critical piece of legal text in our sources, Directive 2017-541.
Yes, adopted in March 2017. This directive is revolutionary because it fundamentally shifts the perimeter of European criminal law.
How so?
It pushes the boundary of criminalization far back into the preparatory stages of an attack. It mandated that all EU member states criminalize the act of traveling abroad for terrorist purposes.
Just the travel itself.
Exactly. It criminalized receiving or providing terrorist training, even if an attack was never executed. It criminalized organizing or funding that travel.
It's essentially criminalizing the intent and the preparation, rather than waiting for the explosion.
Exactly. They even criminalized the sharing of extremist propaganda online if it could be proven there was an intent to incite violence. The legislative philosophy was that in an era of mass casualty suicide attacks, waiting for the plot to materialize into an action is waiting too long.
But the EU isn't a single monolithic police force. I mean, passing a directive in Brussels is one thing, but it has to be enforced by individual police officers in Paris, Berlin, and London.
Right. Implementation is everything.
And our sources point to research by Frank Foley comparing how different countries actually apply these EU laws on the ground. A lot doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Foley's research is critical here. He demonstrates that EU directives are heavily filtered through domestic societal norms, historical self-images, and localized legal traditions. The EU sets a legal baseline, but the domestic culture dictates how aggressively that law is wielded.
Give me a practical example of how that filter changes the policing on the ground.
Well, look at the contrast between France and the UK. France has a history of a highly centralized, assertive security apparatus, heavily influenced by its experiences during the Algerian War.
Okay.
So when France implements a directive regarding preparatory offenses, it might result in highly proactive, visible police raids in marginalized neighborhoods, leaning heavily into a strong state security posture.
Very visible, very aggressive.
Right. But the UK, conversely, operates on a common law tradition and a different model of community policing shaped by its long conflict in Northern Ireland.
So they handle it differently.
Yeah, they might implement the exact same EU directive, but rely more on covert intelligence gathering and community-led intervention programs like their Prevent strategy. The directive is the same, but the execution reflects the national DNA.
So, if you're a European citizen, how does all this high-level policy actually touch your life? Imagine you are just a regular person walking through an airport tomorrow, heading out for a vacation. What is happening behind the scenes that you don't see?
The impact on the daily life and privacy of citizens is massive, particularly regarding the Schengen area.
Right, which was designed to allow borderless, passport-free travel across most of Europe.
Exactly. But the crisis of transnational foreign fighters forced the EU to rapidly harden its external and internal borders. When you walk through that airport, you are interacting with a vastly expanded security apparatus.
Like Frontex.
Yes, we've seen the massive reinforcement of Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, which now conducts highly stringent biometric checks at the external borders.
But it's the invisible data tracking that is the real shift, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The EU implemented massive, interconnected data networks. The Visa Information System, or VIS, tracks short-stay visas and biometric data. And crucially, the Schengen Information System, SIS2.
What does that one do?
This is a real-time, continent-wide database. When a border guard scans your passport in Rome, the system instantly cross-references your data with intelligence alerts from police in Berlin or Madrid. They are tracking movement, looking for patterns that suggest someone might be a returning foreign fighter.
But this raises a massive glaring red flag for me.
I think I know where you're going with this.
If Directive 2017-541 criminalizes the intent to travel for terrorism, how does a border guard holding a passport prove that the 20-year-old flying to Turkey is intending to cross the Syrian border to join a militia, rather than just taking a cheap holiday to Istanbul?
It's incredibly difficult.
How do you prove intent without heavily invading their digital privacy, like reading their WhatsApp messages, analyzing their search history, mapping their social network?
You've just articulated the defining security dilemma of the 21st century.
It just seems impossible to balance.
The tension between ensuring collective public safety and safeguarding fundamental individual privacy is the most fiercely debated aspect of modern European policy. How does the EU fulfill its primary duty to protect citizens from mass casualty attacks without destroying the very democratic freedoms it claims to be defending?
And as we dive into this, it's vital to note that we are impartially reporting the debate found in the sources here. Amnesty International, for example, is highly critical of this trajectory.
They are very vocal about it.
They point out that the EU's envisioned area of freedom, security, and justice is buckling under the weight of these new laws.
Amnesty International and other human rights monitors warn that Europe is creeping toward a disproportionate, ever-expanding national security state. Their primary concern with directives that criminalize preparatory acts like 2075-41 is that they lower the burden of proof.
Because it's all about intent.
Exactly. When you criminalize intent, you open the door to discriminatory profiling, often targeting specific religious or ethnic minorities. They argue it slowly erodes the presumption of innocence and normalizes emergency surveillance powers that bypass traditional judicial oversight.
The EU's defense, according to the documents, is that these directives are carefully drafted to align with broader international human rights frameworks, ensuring that measures remain necessary and proportionate.
That's their stated position, yes.
But the friction isn't just about physical border stops. The digital censorship is facing intense scrutiny as well. The sources highlight severe pushback from EDI, the European Digital Rights Organization.
EDR's criticisms are targeted directly at the EU Internet Forum and the massive automated hashing databases we discussed earlier.
The digital immune system.
Right. Their concern is rooted in transparency and due process. The EU Internet Forum consists of closed-door meetings between high-level government bureaucrats and the executives of massive private tech monopolies.
And who is left out of the room?
Well, civil society groups, digital rights advocates, and human rights lawyers have largely been shut out of those discussions.
Which is concerning, because isn't outsourcing censorship to Silicon Valley essentially creating a shadow Supreme Court?
That's a strong way to put it, but yes.
I mean, if a government wants to ban a piece of speech, they generally have to go through a legislature and a public court system. But if the EU just pressures a tech CEO in a private meeting to alter their algorithm, the speech disappears with zero public oversight.
That is exactly EDR's argument. They warn about the privatization of law enforcement. When an automated machine learning algorithm is operating at 98% efficiency to scrub content based on opaque corporate terms of service rather than constitutional law, mistakes are inevitable.
Oh, for sure.
A legitimate piece of journalistic reporting documenting war crimes or an academic research paper analyzing extremist propaganda might be swept up and deleted by the algorithm.
Just collateral damage.
Exactly. And because a private company executed the deletion, the citizen has virtually no avenue for legal appeal.
The algorithm acts as judge, jury, and executioner of free speech in milliseconds.
Yep.
Did the EU just ignore these concerns entirely?
Not entirely. The sources note that the EU attempted to balance this by establishing the Civil Society Empowerment Program.
Okay, what is that?
They allocated roughly €6 million to the initiative. The objective was to train and fund over 250 different non-governmental organizations across Europe to produce positive counter-narratives.
So fighting fire with water.
Right. The philosophy is that censorship alone cannot defeat an ideology. You have to flood the digital space with compelling arguments against hate speech and extremism.
You have to engage the youth who are lingering on the ground floor of Muggedom's staircase.
Exactly. Offer them an alternative path before they ever reach the point of moral disengagement.
With €6 million.
Yeah, critics are quick to point out the financial asymmetry. €6 million for civil society is a drop in the ocean compared to the billions of euros tech companies and governments are pouring into the automated surveillance and removal infrastructure.
It's an incredibly complex web. I mean, we've traced the evolution of the threat from the 19th century anarchist wielding dynamite and the printing press to the transnational digital jihadist of today.
It's a huge leap.
We've seen how organizations weaponize the psychology of radicalization, pulling integrated middle-class youth up a digital staircase into violence.
And we've detailed the unprecedented legal and technological response from Europe. The creation of cross-platform hash databases to automatically purge content, the deployment of Europol's IRU to hunt down the propaganda, and the sweeping legal shifts of Directive 2017-541 to criminalize the intent and preparation of terrorism before it happens.
All of which leaves us grappling with a delicate, perhaps impossible balancing act between maintaining a free, open society and utilizing the intense surveillance necessary to prevent mass casualties.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk.
Which brings me to a final thought experiment for you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up. We've talked extensively today about algorithms flagging and deleting illegal content. The machine learning looks for a hash, a digital fingerprint of a video that already exists.
Right.
But what happens to European security policy in the next 5 years as artificial intelligence evolves from reactive to predictive?
Oh, that is the ultimate, rapidly approaching frontier. Algorithmic predictive policing.
Imagine a near future where AI doesn't just scan for known terrorist videos, but perfectly maps your entire digital life against Fathali Moghadam's 6-story building model of radicalization.
It's a terrifying thought.
The AI notices you reading specific political blogs on the ground floor. It tracks your increasingly frustrated posts on the second floor. It monitors your downloads of encrypted messaging apps on the third floor.
It's watching the whole progression.
If machine learning becomes mathematically sophisticated enough to predict with 95% accuracy that a citizen is on a trajectory toward violence, will future EU counterterrorism units attempt to intervene?
That's the million-dollar question.
Will the law evolve to arrest someone while they are still only on the third floor of their psychological journey, long before they've ever bought a weapon or booked a flight? Are we moving toward a reality where our digital wanderings and latent thoughts are policed before they ever manifest into the physical world?
The transition from policing the physical deed to policing the digital intent will undoubtedly be the defining legal, moral, and technological battleground of the coming decade.
It absolutely will be. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the sources. Think back to that opening image, the physical weapon locked in a vault. As we've explored today, that vault is obsolete.
It really is.
The weapon is now a line of code, an algorithmic feed, a viral video. The front line is no longer a physical trench. It's the screen glowing in the palm of your hand. And the defense isn't just about building thicker walls at the border. It's about navigating the fragile nature of truth, privacy, and freedom in the digital age. Keep questioning, keep diving deep, and we'll catch you next time.